Okay, welcome all to our weekly episode of the 3-Minute Therapy podcast with me, Michael Edelstein, a clinical psychologist practicing REBT exclusively remotely now, phone, Zoom, FaceTime, Skype, others. And I'm here with my current partner, Kevin Benbow, also an REBT therapist. And are you doing both remote and in person, Kevin?
No in person for me. I'm just doing remote, and that's how I prefer it. If you live in Arizona, I probably take your insurance. I also take several EAPs, and I'm also licensed in New Mexico. My website is www.cogyuma.com.
Oh, okay, very good, very good. Thanks, Kevin. And let me add my own accolades. I'm author of 4 books on various aspects of REBT. The main one is 3-Minute Therapy. I have a Psychology Today blog, and I have a website called 3minutetherapy.com. 3-Minute Therapy is spelled out, and 3-Minute Therapy is all one word. So the subject of our discussions centers around REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, and that is a form of therapy that was devised in the 1950s by a brilliant psychologist named Albert Ellis. And I learned everything I know from Dr. Ellis when I was 18 and a client of his. And he cured me of lots of problems. I was an emotional basket case when I first started seeing him. So that's one testament to REBT. And there are many, many, many others, and there are some on previous podcasts of ours. We are honored today to have another REBT therapist as our guest to discuss some of his perspectives on REBT and emotional disturbance, and that is Dr. Vince Parr. Vince not only does REBT, but I believe you also bring in a lot of meditation in your therapy. Is that right, Vince?
Yes, I was 3 years ago, I was ordained as a Zen monk, and I really like the Zen approach. And so I combine Eastern and Western, primarily the Zen or the Zen philosophy with the REBT. And I really think that makes a tremendous combination for helping people get rid of their, not just the emotional disturbance, but I think the Zen kind of puts the cherry on top of the sundae, so to speak, to get that deep contentment and personal happiness that's there. And but that, yes, I use both of those. I'd like to give the shout out to Albert Ellis. He's he had more influence in my life than my own parents, and I do think he was the most brilliant psychologist and therapist that yet probably ever lived. And so you and I were lucky to have trained under him and known him for, I guess, 40 plus years, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so tonight the subject is, I also want to mention we have as our very able technical assistant, Chris Rossini, without whose help we could not do these podcasts. So we're greatly indebted to Chris for his assistance. Vince has written a book called You Only Have 4 Problems. That's one of the titles, I believe.
Yes.
And so would you want to lay out each problem one at a time? And as you lay one out, Kevin and I may or may not have some comments on it.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Yes, actually, I've thought of even renaming it again if it's come out with different names, but I say we really have no problems. We have situations that we give ourselves problems about, right? And these 4 problems that we give ourselves are how we deal with anger, how we deal with anxiety, how we deal with depression, and how we deal with guilt. And I've created really simple formulas after seeing people in therapy for some 50 plus years, that we all tend to have many different varieties of anger, right? So we think there's all kinds of, we really think the same thoughts. And I look at thoughts and cognition like food, but it's like sadness and happiness require food, to continue. And if we're suffering, we are feeding the cause of suffering. And if we want to be content, we have to nourish that. So cognitive processes are like food to the mind. And that if we continue down certain paths, the certain particular irrational beliefs or the cognitive process, we're going to suffer. When we are determined not to keep feeding the mind through these processes, the suffering stops.
Yeah.
Stop.
I like that parallel, because also we could feed our body toxic food.
Same thing. Yeah.
Or we could feed our body healthy food. And it's the same idea that you're saying, Vince. We could feed our mind reasonable, rational, realistic, self-facilitating thoughts,
exactly.
or the opposite, destructive and irrational thoughts. And that's what REBT focuses on, identifying your irrational thoughts and showing you how to change that.
Right. And so therefore you're nourishing the body and the mind. You could do that at the same time, or wholesome thoughts or rational thoughts. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so you have outlined a few of these thoughts. What's the first one?
Well, I usually go with anger because I think anger is the most common human emotion. If you just looked at the society today, right, I think anger would be paramount. It's usually the one that comes up first in a lot of people too. And I've written a simple equation: A is equal to ET plus S. And the ET is the egocentric thinking, okay, which means the world revolves around me, and anything I don't like, find unpleasant or inconvenient, plus S, must not exist. And so the egocentric thinking sets us up for that demanding. So as we know in REBT, that anger is created by demanding that either ourself, the world, or others not be the way that it is at this present moment. That's when I can bring in the Zen. This moment doesn't have an option. This moment doesn't have an option. You and I have to be talking right now. We have to be doing this Zoom, not because we like it or don't like it necessarily, but because all the conditions were there. Kevin had said, yeah.
So that's a predictive have to, not a psychopathological, absolutistic have to. And the reason I bring that up, Vince, is because in REBT, we identify must, should, supposed tos, and have tos as statements of irrational beliefs. But as you're pointing out, you could have predictive have tos or preferential have tos. All have tos aren't necessarily absolutistic and psychopathological.
Exactly. And predictions are difficult, particularly when they involve the future. What else are we going to predict, right?
Yeah.
But if you feel anger arising in the body, I go, stop, take a breath, and look for the should. Once you teach folks that it's not what happens to them, but you're demanding that the world go the way you want or not go the way you don't want. That is where we're feeding the thought processes that create anger,
Right. Now,
disturbance.
you said anger is the most common human emotion. I have a different view. In
Okay.
in the clients I work with, I find anxiety is the most common.
Yeah, and it may be.
Depression is second, and then anger is third. Kevin, did you have a take on that?
Uh, I tend to see mainly, well, if we're talking about clinical problems, I see a lot of anxiety, particularly panic disorder, generalized anxiety, that sort of thing. I do see a lot of anger, though. I haven't stopped to count it out to see what's more. Now I'm certainly going to be a little bit more aware of it, though. I did want to make a comment or ask a question here, Vince. I've dabbled in Zen Buddhism a little bit myself, and I like the philosophy. One thing that's interesting is there was Albert Ellis did a paper a while back with, I forget his name, practitioner of Zen Buddhism, and I'm just wondering your take. The shoulds, the musts, those sorts of things, they could be conceptualized in Buddhism as a root of suffering, could they not?
Yes, but it is rooted. So
attachment is the word I was looking for.
yeah,
Sorry.
attack. Yeah, when we cling to these, it's by the way, all the ideas they create formations, and the formations would be the mental formations. They're physical formations, and the physical formations require things like, nature, like the flower is a physical formation, requires, water, rain, earth, temperature, the gardener, and so on. You got to have those formations to create that. And then the mental formations, those four big ones, anger, anxiety, depression, and guilt, are created by certain things that we keep believing, the irrational beliefs, for example.
Right.
And let me say one thing that you mentioned, and when we talk about which comes first, right? Well, when I see folks, I say, well, we have these four. All of us have these four problems, and you can rank order these in terms of how you personally experience these problems. 1, 2, 3, and 4. The one that's in the number one spot for you is going to be what I call your racket, or your favorite bad feeling. Not your favorite because you love it, but when you lose it or when you feel bad, this is the one. This is the neuropsychologists call it a cognitive emotional behavioral loop. This is the one you choose most often, and that will be the one most difficult for you. Whether it's lots of people are anger, lots of people, of course, are anxiety, and so on. But we each have our own personal racket, but we have all of them. We don't.
Actually, I found Vince that some people mainly have one, some people mainly have two, and some people mainly have three. I use Albert Ellis's model of three main areas, and that is a demand on oneself, a demand on others, and a demand on life situations. And I find that if someone has all three, they tend to have the most problems.
Yes.
But most people just have one or two. And it's interesting how someone could have an anger problem, which means they don't accept others. They tend to condemn others or get angry at others, but they accept themselves. And other people don't accept themselves. They put themselves down, but tend to be very nice and friendly and warm and civil toward others. So
until we start talking politics and we get on the highway and cars are pulling in front of us, right?
Well, it depends. If someone has if someone doesn't have an anger problem and they're talking politics and a car pulls in front of them, they may not have anger. So I think people are different, and they're not unitary in these ways.
Yeah, and I think you're correct in that. I think, but it's both ended. If you have the anger, the demand, and the must, and you're correct. I think it's got two tails. It's outside and inside, but I think you're absolutely correct that we tend to do one more than the other. The other is still probably there but it's just not as much as if they're blaming themselves in one case or blaming others. But the blaming is the major cause, and Al was, of course, identified that in the early 50s or, 1950s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Emotional disturbance comes in the form of blaming oneself, blaming
Yeah.
others, or blaming the world, or
Right.
we could say condemning oneself, condemning others, and condemning the world. So those are the three main irrational areas as I see them.
And then how you combine and begin to see totality, which is more of a Zen type philosophy. If you see the totality, you'll see the world, either myself or the situation or others. It doesn't have an option. It has to be the way it is today or this moment. The moment doesn't have an option because of the one word, conditions. If the conditions are there, this moment exists. If it doesn't, I'm looking out the window and it's beautiful sunshine, which means it can't be raining because the conditions for rain doesn't exist.
Right.
Whether I like it or my plants are dying or or whatever, or there's fires in the West or floods in Houston, the conditions exist and they have to exist. Can we do something about those conditions? That's a different story.
Yeah. And would you say that that's a philosophical determinist position rather than a free will position?
Yes, it very much can be. Yeah. And, I mean, we can make a choice to, which I think is humorous right now. They're arguing in Congress right now about how much is, going to green energy. How much is it going to cost? Forget about we're in the world is in pretty much of a crisis. Let's argue about how much is it going to cost to do this, which
Vince,
I find humorous. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Vince. I just had a quick question for you. I've
Sure.
heard you say
Absolutely.
a couple of times that things.
Right.
This is how things have to be. One thing I've always kind of thought from a Buddhist perspective, and maybe we're saying the same thing. I like to look at the world and say, this is how it's supposed to be. I mean, this is how it is.
Well, because it is. Yes.
Right.
That's
a different kind of supposed to.
Mhm.
And we usually identify with someone who's disturbed. That's
Right.
supposed to of reality.
Yes.
Reality is supposed to be reality. That's the way it is.
Right.
It is what
right.
it is. But that's not the supposed to that leads to emotional disturbance or what I
Right.
call psychopathological supposed to.
Got
But
it. Okay.
reality is always the way it is.
Mhm.
It can't be. People always want to know, well, what does it mean? I say, well, it doesn't mean anything. It's reality. If it meant something else, it would be something else.
Yeah. But actually, I agree with you, Vince. Reality doesn't have a meaning attached to it, but it's your job to, if you want to enjoy life, to put meaning to reality.
Yeah,
put your own meaning, you define your own meaning. So now we get into existentialism, from Buddhism to existentialism.
Right,
You define
right.
meaning into your life. The universe isn't going to give you meaning.
Yeah, it's the meaning you give it. And outside of that, it has, the life is just impermanent. It's constant dynamic change. It's probably, there's not an eye in the sky or the universe that really cares one way or the other, whether we get what we want, don't get what we don't want. It probably doesn't stay up worrying about that. It doesn't have a good or bad. The fires in California, the universe doesn't say, well, let's give them more crap. It's probably not got an intention there, which we may have.
Right. I think we're bordering on theism now. So we've discussed theism, determinism, Buddhism.
Exactly. Rational
and,
theory.
and
Yeah.
we snuck in some rational emotive behavior therapy between the
Mhm.
lines.
Exactly.
Other points you'd like to make, Vince, especially that you cover in your book, 4 Blocks to Personal Happiness?
Well, we could go through the other equations real quickly, or we can head off in many other directions. But since there are 4 major blocks, we could take up,
What's
anxiety.
yeah.
Anxiety. You
Okay.
see. So,
Yeah. What's your perspective on anxiety?
well, anxiety, I wrote a simple formula: AX subcase X, AX equals W with a subcase I plus AW subcase plus ICSI. Now, what does all that mean? Well, in order to feel anxiety, I have to project the mind out of the present unfolding show, the present moment. I have to project it to some future. I don't get anxious about yesterday. I get angry, depressed, or guilty. But I get anxious because I project the mind to some made up future that doesn't exist. So what if is the WI? What if, and that starts the dialogue and the conceptual stuff. What if so and so and so and so happened? Or what if it didn't happen and I very much wanted it to happen? And then I do, of course, the AW, which is awfulizing and catastrophizing. If this thing that I made up actually happened, it would be awful, horrible, catastrophic. And I couldn't stand it. So we make up things that don't exist, and then we scare ourselves about our own creation, which is very creative if you look at that. I scare myself about my own mental projections.
Yeah.
And
By the way,
and everything else. Go ahead.
yeah. You may know that Albert Ellis used to use the term catastrophizing along with awfulizing, terribilizing, and horribilizing, but then he gave it up because he decided there are catastrophes. So in his later formulations, he didn't put catastrophizing in with the other 3. Also, I wanted to say something about anxiety about the future. You could have anxiety about the present. For example, let's suppose I have intractable physical pain and I'm looking forward to the future when I die and I'm out of my pain. But right now, I'm saying the anxiety I feel right now is awful, terrible, and horrible, and I can't stand it, and I must not feel this way. So that would be anxiety about the present. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes, you could say that, but it's not catastrophic. I go back to Al's original position, which it's not 100% bad. I guess 100% bad would be you would be dead. But then again, you may look forward to that. But if I'm saying, I can't stand it, I can't stand it, I can't stand it, I go back to Al's analogy. If a steamroller rolls over you slowly in first gear, you may be screaming, I can't stand this, I can't stand this, but you would be incorrect. The person on the corner that says he couldn't stand that, he would be correct. You would just be in intensive pain and so on, which of course is not very pleasant. But so we're kind of splitting hairs here, right?
I don't think so. I think there's a qualitative difference between anxiety about the present. I can't stand it is irrational. You're giving the rational idea. Well, if you had the rational idea, you wouldn't have anxiety. But when you have anxiety, which is what we're talking about, what is the anxiety only about the future? And I'm making the case, and I could be wrong, that anxiety could be about the present. I can't stand it. It's awful. It's horrible.
Well,
right now that the steamroller is going over me.
Well, I will agree, Michael, when I say it sure appears that it's that way. And so I'd say seems or appears that way because it is so intense for you at this moment. But I just differ that anxiety is projecting into into the future, and then we create it. You know, what's happening at the moment, we may be in intense pain, but if we're in intense pain, that is, of course, not pleasant. But you would be suffering in this moment because of the intense pain, and not because what if it's terrible and I can't stand it. You would have physical pain, but not emotional pain, unless it's I shouldn't be doing this. I've lived a good life, all this other kind
Well,
of
there you
stuff.
go. So that would be
Yeah,
anxiety, not about the future. Kevin, did you have an opinion on this?
right.
Well, thinking about the poor the poor guy underneath the steamroller, if I put myself in his place, I can certainly see myself having it'd be really easy to awfulize about it, and I think my demand would be that it stop. This must stop. This has to stop. Whether that's anger, anxiety, or whatever it is. Of course, this is a thought experiment, and I can't imagine providing therapy to somebody as they're being run over by a steamroller. But
Right.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think I would be feeling some anxiety as the steamroller was rolling over my feet and so forth.
Yeah,
That's just me, right?
Yeah,
yeah,
that's just
yeah,
you. And just
yeah.
make an appointment
I-
for a Zoom session. We'll cure you.
and
Yeah,
and
right.
it may have something to do very much, Kevin, with what you're saying about the future life in that intense pain and your past training. You know, am I going to find out? Am I going to heaven? And
Mhm.
what's going to happen to me? You know, it's all a part of that process. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
very good, Vince.
if
Yeah.
there's a hell, I think I'm probably going.
Okay. Right.
Well, we'll
Well,
have a good.
you'll meet
Yeah.
Albert Ellis there.
Yes,
We'll
yes.
all
Hey,
have a good.
Vince.
Yeah.
Vince, we covered anger and anxiety. Did you have a third?
Well, I've got depression and guilt. Depression is really kind of more complicated and gets long. I could go over guilt, which is shorter if you want me to.
Okay, guilt.
A guilt is just G is equal to capital W with a subcase 1 plus W subcase 2. All right. What is that? That guilt, usually when we have a feeling of guilt, we have a concept of wrongness. I've done something wrong. Now, you don't even have to do anything wrong. You could just imagine you might do something wrong, right? That you're going to ask the beautiful woman to go out and you've been married for 20 years or something, right? So you could have a concept of wrongness. Now, again, if we put a period after I've done something wrong or may do something wrong, we wouldn't have guilt, right? We might even enjoy it. There's the jokes I won't go into, but you could go wrongness, comma, is it what happens? And then the W2 is I'm worthless or I'm worth less as a person for even not only doing this wrong thing, but thinking about doing the wrong thing, which is the good old religion teaches us, right? The thought's just as evil as the deed. So,
Amen.
Right. And that is plus,
yeah,
wouldn't it be wrongness plus a demand? I must not do wrong.
sure. The should, let me just say, the should is, I think, present. And by the way, all these equations I give you in totality take place in the same head, right? I mean, I just single out, these are the primary foods that causes you to be sick. And it takes determination to let go of those and stop these, right? So you're absolutely correct. I must not, should not have even had this thought. Absolutely. So,
Right.
but the should is there in almost all disturbance, or that I've seen in all disturbance, but it's primarily there in anger, where the self-rejection is there, and the guilt. And in depression, you get that also that's going on. Okay.
Okay, very good. So are those the 4 blocks: anger, anxiety, depression, and guilt?
Now I can go, yeah, I can go over the depression, just kind of hit the
Okay.
skeleton of
Sure,
it,
sure.
but kind of deeply. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
what's the skeleton?
So depression, H1 plus H2 plus N. Now, and a lot of people, I'll go over the, and they'll say, as soon as I mention it, they go, I don't know anything about math. And I say, this isn't math. Okay, it's just, it's stand for something else. And other people love it because they can write the equations. I've had a lot of people put it on their mirror and they can go right to it when they're upset, and it's helped them quite a bit. So the H1 is again a concept of hopelessness. My life is hopeless. And then H2 is of course, I'm helpless to do anything about it. And you've got that dyad, which you see in depression, hopelessness, and helplessness. But and the last part, the N, you don't have the hopeless and helpless unless you have the N. I need for this present moment, my life situation, I need for it to be different than it is. And if it's not, then I kick in the hopelessness and helplessness. And the hopelessness and helplessness, when I'm outlining it, I put in parentheses, I give up number 1, hopeless. I give up number 2 is the helpless. But I need for this to change and be different. All right. So that's the 4 blocks in a very short, discussion.
Yeah, that's great, Vincent. It's fascinating to me how
Uh-huh.
REBT therapists who agree on 98 or 99% of the approach
Yes.
can have
Yep.
different perspectives. So you
Exactly.
have this slightly different perspective, which speaks to some people, and I have a different one, which speaks to some people. And we had a guest named Elliot Cohn, and he
Yes.
has a book on perfectionism, and
Mhm.
his theme is perfectionism runs through all problems and all irrational beliefs. There's always perfectionism. Okay, well, thanks, Vince and Kevin, for a fascinating, lively, a bit controversial discussion under the rubric of REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. Again, our guest was Vince Parr, who wrote a book about the 4 blocks to personal happiness, and that's Parr with 2 R's, Parr. And Vince, what's your website?
It's parrinstitute.org. All right. Or my email is dparr11@verizon.net if you wanted to communicate. Okay.
Very good. Very good. Thank you for joining us, Vince, in this interesting excavation of the ins and outs of REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy. And some other subjects came up, so we might be able to have you again. Thank you, Kevin, a great REBT therapist. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, author of 3-Minute Therapy, and Chris Rossini is our technical advisor. And we will be on again next week with another stimulating topic related to REBT. If you have comments, put them below. Questions, if you'd like to be a guest or would like to recommend a guest, put it below. If you have a subject you'd like us to discuss, add that to the comments. Donate to Patreon to help us fund these podcasts, and stay on the rational side of life with REBT.